see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and I'm here with Cadden, and we're here to talk about how we can raise the level of empathy within society. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Edwin. Thank you for having me.
That's such a beautiful background you have there. You're just showing me your backyard and hearing the birds chirping, so it looks very idyllic.
Yeah, it's definitely a retreat spot to come home to between all our travels, doing all our work with nonviolent communication and all the things we've been doing. And then once a year, we always have the youth from around the world come here for International Youth Intensive.
Yeah, so you're a nonviolent communication trainer and you do workshops all around the world.
Yeah. Before that, I ran a school for 11 years called Temba, where I had written a philosophy of education based on the tenets of nonviolence and opened up the doors in 1997, which was just after I met Marshall Rosenberg, who founded Nonviolent Communication. And the school had many practices around nonviolence, and empathy was a big piece.
Well, I'm just on your Facebook page, and I'm seeing you with you have a peace sign, and you're standing next to someone with looks like a Kalashnikov, and
yeah,
maybe
it's a Russian rifle.
So what's that all about?
That photo was taken in downtown Kabul, Afghanistan, in 2007. Jesse Weens, Jiva Shanti Mansky, and myself.
Yeah, so we just had a little crash, but you were starting to talk about having been in Afghanistan.
Yeah, in 2007, when we went to Afghanistan to be able to take nonviolent communication trainings, we were able to work 5 days with adults there from different organizations. We worked with the head of from the Ministry of Women's Affairs in the government, a farmer who actually wanted to work to learn how to dialogue with his elders, so that he wanted his village to stop growing poppies and grow food instead. We worked with a woman from another unit of Save the Children that is working to stop the trafficking of children's organs. So everyone had some pretty major pieces they were playing in different organizations. And so we were working with them to train them in conflict resolution and nonviolent communication. And a big piece that we were able to do with them was what we call despair work, where we actually did despair circles in a way that we work with despair circles where and the way we did it there was first we had the women sit in a circle and the men sat in a circle around the women holding silent empathy, and then the women were able to just share their despair of what's been happening there. And then we reversed the roles where the women then held silent empathy for the men on the inner circle. And the despair work, I think, is a very key piece around empathy, our ability to be able to hear the pain, to be able to sit and be with the suffering that might be in the room. And so for them, they said that this broke down a lot of barriers. And one woman even said at the end of the 5-day training, we never mentioned the word forgiveness. It wasn't a specific aspect or something we named, but at the end of those 5 days, she said, her quote was, "All my life, my religion has told me I should forgive. But until this week, when I could see the needs behind the action the person was choosing, could I really forgive that person?" So I think there's something to being able to witness each other's stories. But then another component I think that's in there that NVC brings is the ability to hear the needs inside the story that's being told.
Mm-hmm.
So it shifts us from commiserating to actually empathizing.
Yeah, so you start with the presence, kind of going towards the suffering, kind of being present with the suffering. And then kind of the next part is kind of seeing kind of what's around the suffering, the experiences and the feelings and the kind of the humanity and the needs and the values that are kind of connected to that suffering. Something like that, or does that resonate? Or
yeah, that does resonate. I think there's something in there around being able to see what our commonality is. I think often we've been trained or taught that we need to look for details and preferences as our commonality, and that's not really what our commonality is as humans. It's really these needs that are pulsing through us that, that let us know that we are needing connection or needing community or security or protection. And one of the things that Jesse Weens and I created, worldempathy.org, it's a website where you can download needs in 17 different languages. Because something Marshall Rosenberg said, I think one of the very first trainings I ever met him at back in 96, I heard him say he defined a human need as something in common with all. Well, at that point, there was only 6 billion of us, 6 billion people on the planet. Now we have to up that to 7 billion people on the planet. But something about that really intrigued me. And as I began being asked to go and do trainings in other cultures and other countries, I kind of began to do my own research. So over the last 10 years, as I've traveled to 6 different continents and lots of different cultures and different countries, and I've worked with people between ages 5 and upwards into their 90s, the needs list that Jesse and I use is kind of from this study, this being on the front lines and finding out what are in any language, what are the words that are going to hit that kind of that where we've hit a commonality in our dialogue or in our understanding or in our hearing of each other. And so there was something Marshall was really onto in saying that around defining needs that way that I've really discovered being out there in the world.
So my interest in kind of what I'm looking at is how do we, create a culture of empathy within our world culture, which is just basically raising the level of empathy. And what you're saying is one part of it is if there's pain and despair, is kind of being present with the pain and despair and seeing the deeper needs that are behind or connected to that, if I understand it correctly. So it's that kind of that presence, bringing that presence, but also that other component of looking kind of beyond.
And from what I've seen, I don't think people need to have a lot of NVC training in order to return to that. I've watched people with no NVC training just walk in and become present to the needs that are there in the story. I think our quality of presence does matter in order to raise the empathy bar that's in the room. And I've witnessed that taking only one person. So there is something about how I trust that each person that we connect with actually does create a ripple effect of some degree. And that was one reason why I wanted to start a school, because I wanted to know what would be the ripple effect if, kids at school were getting this practice on a daily level. And I discontinued running the school because I got so many requests to start traveling and offering teachings, because I originally didn't get into this as an NVC trainer. I kind of got certified kicking and screaming, but I said yes to the request. And so I became a certified trainer and started doing more of this style of teaching rather than running a school. But I'm happy to say what I've witnessed in the youth that attended my school, what they've gone out and then had effect on, has really blown my mind. So I have a lot of trust that if I pay attention to what I'm bringing in the room, and then trust that can be passed forward, there's something to that I think and then the question rises is, okay, so what's it going to take for us to reach a tipping point? That's actually my favorite dialogue to have with Marshall, because we really get in there about what do we imagine would be the tipping point for a systematic change in any one particular area, and that was something that made me really curious about the Occupy movement, because of how many people so quickly got involved with it. I was curious, is this going to be one of our tipping points? You know, if there's a culture of empathy among these folks, and if they can move that forward, you know, and they can immerse and become part of the we, and then it's we moving it forward as a culture of empathy, maybe we could hit a tipping point of some kind.
Mm-hmm. Well, I did see on YouTube there was some videos. I saw some circles that you were doing. It looked like it's some Occupy protests or encampments or something. So you actually went out there, and how did that work out?
Yeah, we got to go to Occupy Wall Street up in New York. We went to Occupy DC, and then here locally, Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And in each one, we offered trainings on nonviolence, about the 6 principles Dr. King laid forth. And then also we did despair circles. We actually had a chance to do a despair circle with 33 of the original occupiers up in Wall Street, and it was quite powerful. And in common to all the occupies that we visited, one of the things we were witnessing, were some of the major conflicts were between the occupiers and then the people who had already been living on the streets, who had already been occupying the park to some degree. And so now they were trying to live together, and share this space. And to me, that was a real interesting microcosm, if you will, of what we all are trying to do right now on the planet. You know, we're all occupying a bit of space, and we're all trying to share it and figure out how to navigate the resources and all these different things that feed our life, and then how to do it together so that everyone's needs can actually be met. And one of the pieces we would work specifically with them on is how to listen to each other, but not through the veil of their already fixed ideas about someone. And in fact, in one of the circles we had in DC, as Jesse and I were connecting with different people, people were really shocked to find out who was actually homeless in that circle. They didn't even know who was homeless because they had a fixed idea about what homeless meant. And there wasn't anyone there that fit the picture. So they were surprised that there were actually 3 people sitting in that circle that had been living in and around that park for the last 6 years.
So so one of the processes for deepening empathy is try to dissolve, maybe let go of some of those labels that we have of each other, like you're a business person, I'm a homeless, or I'm, you know, rich, you're poor, or, you know, or I'm a, you know, White Sox fan, you're a, you know.
So when it comes to basketball, I'm a Jayhawk.
Okay, now the truth comes out. As long as it doesn't deal with sports, okay.
Yeah, the fixed ideas, the labels are, as Marshall named it in nonviolent communication, enemy imaging, which is basically anything that blocks my ability to connect to you. And, you know, I run into this all the time as an educator and working with educators, because as an educator, you're trained to diagnose, and even more so diagnose children these days. And so they want to know, well, what do we do with these diagnoses? And my sense of it is if it brings you closer into connection and understanding the human that's in front of you, it might be useful information. But if it's blocking your ability to see who stands before you right now in the given moment, then it's something we need to let go. And one of the interesting things about being up at Wall Street was, you know, Jesse and I got to work right there in Liberty Plaza. And then we actually went over and had lunch at Goldman Sachs with a person who's in one of our training programs. So there it was. I got to be in both places within a matter of 2 hours. The 2 places that are in the media on the map as being, this is who's having this argument. Something that you would say, oh, that represents the 99 and that represents the 1. And when I walk through both places, I could conjure up my own observations and make my own perceptions about each place. But really, what I was doing was walking in and connecting to the humans that were actually there and walking around and seeing what was alive and seeing how I could be of service to the humans that I came in contact with.
Yeah, you're starting to kind of go into some of the blocks to empathy, things that block, our empathic connection with others, and analysis and fixing, and some of these others are sometimes seen as blocks to the empathic connection. But I think what you were kind of alluding to is that maybe before we use some of those other tools, that
Mm.
first start with connection first
Yep.
before going into that. A lot of times in there's a lot of analysis in writings if you're looking in academics or on the internet or in a lot of the newspapers or what have you. It's like if we just analyze you, then first, then somehow that will lead to some kind of truth and some kind of insight or something will happen. But it seems it's really about first looking for that connection, saying
Mm.
how can I connect with you, and then maybe later on there can be some kind of analysis if there's some kind of problem, or use those other tools.
Well, and I think a lot of those strategies like diagnosing, advising, educating, those all came to play. I trust they came into play because people wanted to connect and wanted to contribute in some way. And what I found is those things might be useful, but like you just shared, unless I actually have a connection with the person first, those tools will get lost and they won't be as effective, for definitely not effective for the long term as they could be if we have a connection in place. And part of getting to that connection in raising the empathy so that I can have empathy between us and in my presence, part of that is letting go of any of these fixed ideas, letting go of seeing you in a particular way or sizing you up in any particular way.
Yeah, so it's like you need somehow though the intention to want to connect first,
Hmm.
right? It's like you see somebody at Wall Street, and it's like how do you interact with them? Are you going to try to empathize with them first? You're going to try to analyze them or judge them or whatever. And I kind of wonder, like, why would you go in with empathy first? It's kind of like, what is the intention for wanting empathic connection in the
Well, if
first
my
place?
well, if my intention is to connect, then empathy is just simply present because then I'm curious about you as a human. And then if I'm curious about you as a human, that means I'm in consideration of what might be true for you. And what might be true for you is you have zero interest in talking to me, or you have zero interest in wanting to know anything about me. And so this is where the slippery slope can be really interesting because if my intention is to get my way, even if to get my way is to connect, it's all going to fall apart. I'm not going to end up with connection. That's just going to be me trying to force what I think needs to have happen. And that's still me in the game of, me versus you. And I'm going to try and make it my way. Even if I think my way is about connection, it's a really subtle thing to really drop into a place of an honest, authentic connection where I'm not really going to expect anything out of you other than a simple presence to contribute to life in a way that I want to contribute to life. And that's just simply, I'm curious. A return to curiosity, I think, is a real key factor in bringing empathy into the room. Because if I'm not curious about what's what really might be true for you, even if what truth for you is completely in a disagreement with me, and I'm not curious about that, it's not likely I'm going to meet you with a quality of empathy.
And where does that value or that embodiment of even wanting to be curious come from?
Mm.
What's kind of the source of that? for you. For myself, I could imagine it's like, oh, this is fun. There's a little, it's joyful when I'm curious about things. I discover new things. Perhaps that's one source of that value of and kind of grounding in curiosity.
Yeah. I th yeah, I would agree with that description. I like that a lot. Yeah, it's interesting how it makes me pause to go in to reflect what brings alive that curiosity in me. And I notice two things come alive. One is around compassion and kind of the way I define compassion. I look at the Latin roots of calm meaning with and passion meaning pain. And for me, my practices around compassion are about kind of raising my ability to be with suffering. I remember, gosh, I can't remember when it was. It must have been around 97, 98. It was in the early days of studying with Marshall. And I remember him saying at one point that why is a violent question. And I found that fascinating because one of the things as an educator that kept me authentic and honest is I kept asking the question, why educate? That way I wouldn't get locked into any particular thing. I wanted to stay really alive with my students as too close to my passion. And when he said that, I looked at why differently, and part of that became my path around understanding true compassion, that it wasn't about being nice. It wasn't about, okay, let's get polite with each other and sit in silence necessarily. But if I'm going to be curious, do I have the capacity to be with whatever suffering might arise in another person? And that question being why being violent is oftentimes we ask, why does this happen in the world? Why is that unfair? Why is it not equal yet? Why is there war? When we tend to ask why about these things that are really requesting a capacity of compassion, our ability to be with suffering, and studying meditation. One of the things that I had a chance to study around the Buddha is the Buddha didn't sit down to get enlightenment, contrary to a lot of how a westernization of this idea, we're going to sit and get enlightened or sit and get quiet or sit and we're going to get something, kind of like going to the store, I'm going to get on my Zafu and I'm going to get something. But sitting down for the Buddha was really to increase his capacity to be with the suffering that he wasn't understanding. It was really to understand suffering and really for him to raise his presence to be with what is. And so for me, that's an aspect of being curious, is doing practices and working around my capacity to be with suffering, working with true compassion. And then I think another aspect for me that came up when you asked me to reflect on it around what brings alive curiosity in me is I like to laugh at how often I've been wrong in my life. It's like what this mind has told me about a situation has been less of what really is than if I just remain curious to what really is unfolding in front of me. And that it makes me laugh because it's, how many assumptions have I been wrong about it? It's getting brutally honest with myself that, whoa, I've been wrong a lot. Which then increases my compassion for myself for how much suffering I've created just between my 2 ears.
Yeah, I know what you're saying about that, the being wrong so many times. It's like making statements and assumptions and all that, and it's like it turns out. So it's like, I give up doing this anymore. It doesn't work. So you kind of like just get rid of it for maybe, yeah. And it seems like something is coming up about that, about the why, that maybe the why is kind of like an analysis, a tool of analysis. So when you're using why, it's like you're analyzing and kind of something gets maybe shut down in terms of it's like the front line probing of trying to analyze something, whereas what is maybe a little bit less of that or something.
Well, it was interesting, even just noticing your body language with asking the word why. We're like kind of diving forward as opposed to
Yeah,
the what kind of allows us just to
sitting
return to,
back.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I had an interesting experience in dance where this kind of came up for me. Is like I was just feeling. I do this freestyle dance. I was feeling my body and just seeing what's going on. What does my body feel like? And I was feeling this anxiety in it, and it's like this little bit like a spike, a black spike that kind of goes through the core of my body. And I'm saying, what's that all about? It's like I'm going to try to get really close to it, to really see it, to be really present, to really feel it as fully as I can. So I kind of focused my awareness and my presence on it, and I'm doing, I'm moving around in the dance, and while I'm doing this, and it took a shape, and it was like going into a blackness, and then it kind of like dissolved. It's like I kind of went through it, and it was as if another kind of door opened up. But within about 5 seconds, it seemed like another fear, another anxiety appeared, and this was like this anxiety that was like a dome, like a dull fog that kind of comes, over my brain. And so I kind of really get present with that, and it's kind of like went into that, and suddenly it kind of like lifted. It just kind of opened up, and then there was somebody that So I started dancing with other people and saying, "Well, is there any fears anywhere? Let me go look for the fears and kind of be present. I want to expand the fear as fully into my consciousness as possible to really." It's like to experience and see and taste and touch, just touch it, really experience it to its fullest. And like there was one person who I would try to dance with sometime, and then she would always like turn and go away. So I had this anxiety of being left. Oh, if I dance with this person, I get this anxiety of kind of being rejected. So I thought, I'll go really close into that fear, into that anxiety. And it was almost as if my presence of going in there kind of maintained a connection between us. And it was like kind of one fear after the other, like I was saying, having all these different manifestations. And they just kept kind of dissolving. And I just kind of got more and more and more and more relaxed. It was kind of like amazing. So that was kind of like that presence with fear, and I think maybe that that suffering has maybe a similar kind of a quality to it in the sense of being present and bringing your presence to it.
It sounds like you had a bit of a what I would call a meditation with strong emotions and being able to not be caught so necessarily by them, but actually to witness them and see them, just see them for what they were. I remember years ago I had a chance in the Bay Area to study the Heart Sutra with the Dalai Lama, and it was amazing. They brought in these dancers from China, and it was beautiful and moving, and he began to cry, and he rarely spoke English. He was being translated for the teachings. But in this moment, as he cried, he looks up and he puts his hand up and he says, "It's just an emotion, it will pass." And then he goes back to crying. And then he let it fully move through. And then he shared, through translation, how touched he was to be witnessing these beautiful Chinese dancers. And here we were, all these Tibetan monks, and that there was this bridge, of connection made, and how he wanted the healing to really happen between the countries. And that that taught me a lot about emotion, and then the science fact that emotions last for 9 seconds, enough time for the cerebral fluid to flow up the spine, wash over the brain, and go down. And that's where we got the anger management count to 10, because the hope
Mm-hmm.
was,
Mm.
that something would shift. And I happened to be one of those patients that, I'd count to 10 and I'd go from, anger to rage. So counting to 10 wasn't necessarily the trick. But I love what you just described, because that's like getting really to what you were just saying about the suffering, getting really a chance to be with and be present too, even just simply what rises in a matter of seconds. And and it's leaning on nonviolent communication in this way. I love how Marshall drew it out, in that when we take a look at what is, just observe it, we notice that our thoughts begin, yeah? And then we get to notice, what does that stimulate within us, the feelings or sensation? Because that one thing that we observe isn't about that observation now is truth. It's just what we're observing. Because you and I might observe the same thing, but it might stimulate fear in you and harmony in me, or it might stimulate love in you, and it might stimulate a repulsion in me. But it's what I observe, what sensation gets stimulated in me, and then being able to drop down and connect to the impulse of life, or the need, the quality of life I'm connected now to. Whether it's, wow, I'm feeling repulsed because I'm needing security, or needing trust, or whatever that is. Then I get to honestly take a look at what that means for me, because there's so much that's happening here in order for me then to be present to you. And that's another piece of the puzzle around what you asked about. So do I just walk in and start giving empathy? Do I first I've got to get self-connected enough to check, am I curious about what's going on with me? Am I curious about what's going on with you? And then I get to move from that point to decide to go make a connection, rather than this idea that I have to connect. I'm not going to move from that place that I have to connect, or I have to give empathy, and that's the ultimate way to get peace on the planet. It's got to come from a truer, authentic place in here before I move out.
Yeah, it's like not using will to kind of impose something
Hmm.
in a sense. Because I'm kind of driven, so I feel like I maybe have a lot of will sometimes in kind of making things happen. And I also kind of wonder, not wonder, I'm looking at, to build a culture of empathy, there's this personal part like we're talking about, but there's also societal. We live within societal structures, voting, elections, institutions, and how do we transform those institutions? And sometimes a social structure, like a classroom, right? You can have a teacher up there, and it's like this structure, kind of teaching, and this is what you need to kind of learn and memorize this, and versus a class, a structured class where the students are in small groups and dialoguing with each other, or doing if there's a conflict circle process, or just all kinds of different ways that might structurally heighten the level of empathy.
Mm.
So I guess I'm kind of looking for myself how to kind of ground myself to,
Mm.
what I mean, to, I do see the need for creating a culture of empathy, that we need a vocabulary, and how best to do that. And so it's a bit of a quest to find ways of doing it.
Well, I think one of the pieces that I see you doing, is creating resources for people, and I find that really invaluable, because I think there's a lot of, when people begin to ask themselves, am I empathetic? Do I have a quality? Do I have empathy? What is empathy? Um, I love that you've begun to create a place that people can go and begin to learn about it, or begin to understand it, or just be in the discovery of the question, of what is it. that's one of the reasons why I really trust Marshall's body of work, and having known him over the years, is I've watched him change the questions and I've watched him shift, what it looks like. I'd really like for him to get his next book out soon. I've joked with him a few times about that his first book has really screwed things up, and so he really needs to correct it and get his next book out, because this idea that needs are somehow met or unmet, or this idea that your needs are versus my needs, or that we've introduced that idea with this idea that needs can be met or unmet, removes us again and puts us back into that game of butting heads rather than being present to each other. That, wow, connection is something that's so in common with us. Why? Or food is something so in common with us, or respect is something so in common with us, that why would I want respect at the expense of you not also experiencing respect? Or that there's something much bigger at play here when empathy is in the room, that it sees that there's an equality around the needs. And the interesting thing that I've had a chance to experiment with is being in the classroom. Because when we look at this equality of needs, I think people can really confuse what a power with system is. Now, there wasn't any confusion that, being the person in the classroom that we're going to play with, sometimes calling me teacher, although we played in my classroom a lot with labels and numbers of ways. But one of the things we did at the beginning of our school year was we honored each person for how long they'd been alive. And we know that there's a body of experience and a body of knowledge that comes with just being alive on the planet and through the things that you've experienced, and that we're all going to be able to share that knowledge. And through being the person that has been alive longer, and I've gotten to witness students over a period of time longer, I have bits of knowledge that I'm going to be the one who brings that to the classroom. The long division isn't going to come through the 5-year-old. All except Jacob. Jacob was a pretty profound 5-year-old. He was born reading, so he's an exception to that. But so there was an honoring that there's an equality based on our needs in the room, no matter who's in the room. And then from there, we can honor that sometimes you're going to lead because you have a certain skill set that we need to learn from. So we're going to follow you at that moment. And then there's a certain skill set that I have that is going to help us be productive as a community or productive in our learning. So we're going to follow me in that moment. So then there are different leaders, and those different leaders, and that's a place of true equality and true power with. That true power with actually has leaders, but it changes leaders based on the skill set that's most necessary in a particular moment to give to the community what the community came together to get. And what a classroom is, we come together to get learning. So yeah, I'm probably going to be presenting more topics and more things throughout the day than, say, some of the students. And they also have skill sets and things that I'm not going to say just because you're 7, no, I'm not going to listen to you. I mean, I often found in our conflict resolution circles, usually the 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds were always called to be the mediators. And I, through my own witnessing of that, it's because they were just they had the easiest time being impartial and fair and just really listening rather than trying to get into who did what to whom.
Well, so what I was hearing is kind of at the basic level is this sense and awareness of everyone's needs. And maybe another word for that is the common humanity. I think that's a kind of a term that's, they seem to be the same. That for me, that kind of the needs, the vocabulary of NVC with needs is kind of a way of kind of starting to take apart what our common humanity is. I don't know if that is kind of how you would see it, or.
Yeah, I like that phrasing a lot, the common humanity. And while you were speaking, I was reminded of, Eleanor Roosevelt writing the charter for the UN about human rights. And if you replace the word rights with the word needs in that document, it's fascinating. She speaks directly to the list of human needs that usually nonviolent communication trainers utilize. And I find it fascinating that we actually have a document, supposedly in this international league of people that are working towards peace on the planet. And this document talks about, you know, the need for belonging, or the right for belonging, or the need for food, or the right for food, or if you replace the word need and right, it's really fascinating to read that document and go, wow, this is a written request for what humans on this planet that we could all really say yes to if we could return to that curiosity, return to a place of a true power where we are taking turns as leaders, that that are suffering, that we're actually bearing witness to our suffering rather than acting out from our pain and our suffering.
Well, listening to what you're saying, my mind keeps jumping off to all these different threads, and there's this whole notion about rights, and a lot of times, rights, I found I can understand that, but it seems that rights has some kind of a conflict, or maybe a sense of differentiation, a little bit like saying that maybe the notion that everybody's a greedy, selfish, self-centered person, and these rights are somehow something you have to kind of like fight for, and to create some kind of equality or justice or something. And whereas this other way of kind of looking at it is that we all have this common humanity, and it's that to see that. And so anyway, those two notions of rights and kind of the common humanity is something I've kind of struggled with. Because the rights, the rights is a lot of like legal jargon, and in the legal field, and it's like we have to fight for our rights. There's this competition or something quality. So I wonder if you have some, kind of thoughts about that. Give me some clarity.
Well, I'm happy to explore it with you. It might make it more muddy. Yeah, well, it's interesting. One of the things that came very alive for me, particularly around the Occupy movement, is the truth that the land we're all on has actually been occupied since 1492. That this land we call the United States originally had people on it, and then other people came in and began to occupy it. And by either force or willingness, genocide, many, many strategies, this land now is the United States, and the original peoples that are here are kept on reservations still today. And so what you just described, I take a look at from a couple different perspectives, from a perspective of someone with a lot of unknown and known mixed heritage, and what does it mean? Because the other word that comes alive when you start discussing rights, that I think is this idea of privilege, or this idea that certain people can have and certain people can have not. And in order for certain people to have, then someone else is going to suffer somehow. And that ideology was, I believe, from the best of what I've studied and can understand, was born from an idea that somehow there wasn't going to be enough for everyone. And I think it's a core belief that has permeated generations and permeated people, and it's a quality of thinking that I think Walter Wink, Marshall Rosenberg names as the domination culture, a way of trying to put things in place based on this idea that there's not really enough. And so what I enjoyed about your trying to untangle this idea of like looking at the word rights and the idea of needs is that Well, one way I want to say it is we often have a saying um, in the indigenous peoples here in North America. We say walking the good red road. And what I've learned since being in nonviolent communication, how I can translate that for people is good. Walking the good red road. Good simply means all needs are met for all people. It's that we're living in an interdependence where everything is taken care of. We're going to walk the good road where all needs are met for all beings. And so this idea then lets go of that idea of rights, because there isn't a competition. There isn't this idea that you can't have so that I can have. And that then brings in the word right. Well, now you have a right, because it brings in, because what usually follows the word right is deserve. Is, you have a right to deserve, you deserve, and so that becomes part of that domination culture thinking and speaking that we've all learned in that not enoughness paradigm, that somehow I have to prove my worth. I have to prove
Mm.
that I deserve as much food as you, or I need to prove that I deserve to vote. I have the right to vote. I deserve to vote. And so then we get into these competitions that um, that aren't connected to what we're hoping for when we talk about this idea that empathy is going to be in place. Because when empathy in place, this interdependence of all needs met for all beings just simply happens. In many of the indigenous nations here in North America, there isn't a word for empathy. Four generations back, um, there's a Cherokee line, and so I've been looking at the Cherokee lineage and the Cherokee language, and there's not a word for empathy. There's not a word for empathy in several of the languages. So when I started talking to elders and asking them about it and saying, so I don't understand, is empathy a new word? Why isn't there a word for empathy? And I had two elders say to me, well, why do you need a word for simply how you are and how you live? And so I'm curious about this idea that when empathy's in place, when we really are moving from this place of empathy, we do dissolve this idea of rights. We do dissolve this idea of deservedness, because then we're moving towards really being in an interdependent place where we are in service of all needs of all beings.
Yeah,
I
this
don't know,
is
that's stimulating me.
yeah. Well, there's another half a dozen threads that we could follow for the next couple days. But I think for me, the a real interesting connection here is that to the science.
Mm.
That for from my understanding, for quite a long time, science has kind of said, well, we're all greedy, selfish, self-centered beings, just kind of grasping for ourselves, which fits very nicely into some of that vocabulary there, maybe about rights. So we have to fight for our rights. But then there's also now science about mirror neurons, which says that, we're basically biologically seeing and feeling each other, and a kind of our world, our experience is uh, a compilation of all these experiences that we have from others. As I'm seeing you, your emotions are, part of me through the mirror neurons part that they're playing themselves out. And that so it seems like we have capacity for both of those ways of being, and we can kind of nurture one or nurture the other. And it's, for me, I guess it's looking at how do we nurture the empathic way of being, and creating the tools internally to foster that, and as well as the social structures maybe that will help to foster it. And
Mm.
I think that NVC is just one of many different processes that kind of
Mm.
help nurture that empathic connection.
Mm. I think there's something about playing with the containers and seeing what actually produces more culture of empathy. Mahatma Gandhi called it experiments in truth, that every time we connect, that's an experiment in truth. Every time we have a conversation, that's experiment in truth. And so that's one of the ways that I live and practice, is that every dialogue I have is my moment to experiment in truth and find out what's my capacity of compassion, what's my ability to connect, what's my ability to raise the empathy bar in the space. Um, and that's one of the reasons we do the work the way we do it, with particularly with Play in the Wild, and creating containers where these youth can come together, where, these youth, before they even come together, they've agreed to unplug from electronics and the internet. They've agreed to unplug from refined sugars. They've agreed to spend these 9 days living together, and they've agreed to that they will participate in cooking meals and sharing in the cooking of meals with each other, and participating in the learning circles and what rises there, and that we would be moving as a group, and they're, we speak about it on the front side to say that this is the experiment in truth we want to try and see what rises out of it. And so then they all have this agreement, and then they come to Play in the Wild, whether it's a trek or a youth intensive. And so we've created a container to see what it is that we can create. And then through that, we notice that with a few things in place, it's actually easier to get to the practices of empathy and understanding and compassion. And then what we learn about when these kids go home is they actually start implementing in their home. I just got an email from a parent who said, my child came home with a menu she wanted to try out for a week with us, and told us that if we sat down at the table and ate together as a family, and if we ate certain kinds of foods, we might actually be nicer to each other. So we all agreed we'd try it to see what would happen. And actually 4 days later, we found we were actually curious and talking about it. I learned more about my kids in the last 4 days than I've known in years. And so I don't know that there's a particular formula, but I notice it's the pausing and paying attention to what is the quality of connection that we're wanting to have. And that's what we are doing with Play in the Wild, is trying to create these containers so that these youth have an opportunity to kind of pause and see the quality of connections they already have in their life. What is it they want to do to change them? And then we play with a myriad of strategies that can support their practices in compassion and empathy. So I think playing with structures is a key factor. I mean, I ran a school for 11 years, playing with a different kind of structure to see what that could create. And so I think we need to ask ourselves, if we're going in to change a structure, I think the first question we need to ask is, so what is it about the structure we'd like to keep in place? Because of why do we want to change it? Or are we willing just to start a new structure? Because
Yes.
I don't know how exhausted we're making ourselves by going into a lot of structures that are in place, trying to change so much of it, but that's what I did with education, is I took a look at what had America been doing since the inception of mandatory education. And basically the one thing I really enjoyed about it was when it used to have a multi-age classroom. And so I said, okay, I'll start with that. And that was the only structural piece I took from public education, was a multi-age classroom from the inception of when it first began compulsory in Boston. Boston is what started our public system. But so I think we need to look at what is working, and then start from that place. Because if we just try to walk into an institution, whether it's a hospital or a prison, because I've worked with prisoners. I worked in San Quentin for a period of time with men that were going to be paroled, who were in for either rape or some of a sexual assault nature. And being a woman who had been raped, I would go in and speak with these prisoners, and we'd actually get to their stories of when they had been abused. and we'd begin to look at what can actually stop the cycle. And for many of these men, they were grateful San Quentin was there. They were grateful to have the protective use of force that separated them from people that they would cause harm to. And that's something Dr. King used to talk about, where I think he took it from Gandhi's work and improved on it. Was Dr. King said one of the most nonviolent things you can do is remove yourself from being hit, because if that person has nobody to hit, they're not committing a violent act. So you've now given not only to yourself, you've given to that other person. So there is a place for a structure that we could utilize that has a protective use of force, that puts people in a place of protection, because those men that I got a chance to work with were grateful for getting removed from society for a period of time so they could get the learning that they needed and the time for healing and the space to go, okay, good, everybody's safe right now because I'm in here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's really important for us to look honestly at institutions and start from the place of, okay, what about it works? Because I imagine what might still be working might be the initial place of why it was put in place to try to meet needs in the first place. That's kind of my spiel on institutions.
Yeah, it's what I really kind of saw in that for myself was one, the playfulness of the structure is to have the intention that the structure should serve connection. And if the structure serves connection, then you kind of use that and kind of keep a playful openness to the structure and say, well, the structure can change if we find something else that helps us connect more and more deeply than, but not being too fixed and rigid on the structure.
Or even in our fixed ideas about a structure or an institution, if I walk into a school with the thoughts very alive, this is wrong, it's not working, I've lost my ability to be curious, I've lost my ability to be present, so then I'm not going to be able to make connection with the humans inside of that institution. I'm only seeing my enemy image of an institution, or that it doesn't work.
Well, you've brought up curiosity, quite a few times. It seems like a real central part to, kind of your being in the world and how you approach connection. And I've seen some studies, about compassion fatigue, and they're actually the people who are doing a study saying that actually one of the ways to overcome that, empathy, compassion fatigue, however you want to call it, is by remaining curious. That it's the curiosity that kind of keeps you kind of alive and kind of a dynamic and keeps you from getting that overwhelm and that burnout quality. So it sounds like you really have good company with some academics here at Berkeley.
Well, I noticed for myself that my curiosity gets squashed when I expect people to be different than how they actually are. If my expectation of someone is about them being different from who they are, or being different from what they're actually offering me in that moment, I fatigue myself. I can make myself exhausted by expecting people to be different than how they are.
Well, when I going on a little bit different topic. Usually, I've lately been getting into metaphors. I get creating metaphors of empathy and not empathy. So I've been structuring the conversations around that, and I kind of forgot to do that. So I want to try to get back to. Do you have a metaphor of what empathy is like? It's empathy is often just is actually commonly defined as standing in someone else's shoes and looking through someone else's eyes, which is just a metaphor. And for me, it's a cornucopia. Empathy is like a cornucopia, and it maybe ties in with curiosity and the richness that you get from empathizing. The whole, you get all these different flavors of life and experience with others.
Wow, a metaphor. Well, my favorite metaphor for so many things is actually the caterpillar, and and the caterpillar is already preconditioned and designed to become the butterfly. And there's something that happens in that cocoon that, if interrupted, it can't finish its course. And I mean, I found that very powerful for learning, because I really equate that to how we learn, that we're wired for learning. It would, unless we have physical damage to the brain in some capacity, we really are wired for learning. We're wired to unfold into whatever it is that this particular something is to unfold into. But when you were just talking now about empathy, I was thinking, well, I guess I have a belief we're wired for empathy, and it really can unfold. And when we've been interrupted in our process and taught how to criticize, blame, and judge, we're not quite flying as smoothly as maybe we could if the process hadn't been interrupted. I whenever I present the vocabulary of needs and say this is the first vocabulary list any of my 5-year-olds were given, this is the first set of words everybody worked with at my school, I have educators say, oh, isn't that a complex? I've had parents go, isn't this too complex of a language to use with kids? And I always say, well, did you pause and ask yourself, was it too complex to teach them the words that offer blame, criticism, and judgment and prejudice? And they go, well, no. And I go, well, why pause now?
So then the empathy is like this, is like an unfolding or a transformation, like the butterfly, the caterpillar turning into the butterfly. It has a natural unfolding that it kind of biologically does. And I guess the opposite of empathy is like that being kind of blocked. So it's like the blocks, that something is keeping that unfolding from happening then.
Yeah. So don't rip the cocoon, just let it.
Don't tear it open. Say it's time to hatch now. You have to hatch. It's like it has its own unfolding to kind of do.
Well, we got to hit a willingness to go into the dark in the cocoon.
Oh, we have to be willing to sit inside the cocoon and be dark for a while.
In the unknown, in the mystery. Maybe that's where the curiosity rises, is, that our willingness to not know the outcome. We don't know exactly what's going to come out of this connection. We don't know exactly what's going to come out of our being curious about each other. But there's this natural unfolding that brings about beauty and harmony and ease.
Well, I can see that, playing out is one person seeing themselves as that, and that kind of unfolding. So if we kind of scale it up to a whole culture, what does a whole world culture of empathy look like? Using, kind of building on that metaphor.
Well, I think a culture of empathy at that level, well, I guess the metaphor would be then the entire forest. Because how would, I don't notice, when I have witnessed butterflies in the wild, which I do all the time here in the garden and in the forest, I witness their unfolding process happen, and I don't witness anything in nature actually competing with each other. The tree is doing what it needs to do, and it's supplying whatever it needs to the squirrel, and the squirrel's doing whatever it needs to do, and it's supplying whatever it needs to, if hawk gets lunch that day from squirrel, or or starts to crack open nuts to plant more trees. And I kind of I have a huge disagreement with Darwinian and mechanistic theories that somehow this was all in competition of each other, because what I witness is is an immense amount of trust and harmony where everything is doing what it needs to do to create a productive, harmonious community of life. And so if we each are individuals as the butterfly, working with that empathy to unfold in us, then our surroundings, the greater world, really is the bigger structures where, um, if they're not impeding that particular progress, then my guess is we would see an incredibly productive and harmonious community. And I do mean productive in the sense of the word, because one of the things a lot of people don't study about Gandhi in the Western culture is how much he actually wrote about economics and education. I mean, he, really took a look at this idea of, what would make a productive society. And part of that productivity is not trying to harness everyone to outcome to do one particular thing the same way, but that you you're unfolding the way to become whatever it is that with your skill set and your gifts and your talents to be able to give that to society, and for me to do the same. And if each person's doing the same, then all those gifts get given to society. And that's one of the reasons why I have the word diversity on my needs list, is I haven't seen anything flourish in nature or in the world where there's a lack of diversity. It usually flourishes when there's a lot of diversity.
And maybe one of the last questions here would be: is there a time when you kind of discovered the power of empathy? Was it
Mm.
like one of those aha moments, or has it just been a slow, gradual development?
Gosh, I've had so many amazing aha moments in the last 20 years. I'm trying to think of if there was actually like a first click. Well, I'll tell on myself as a child. A moment that I'll connect to a learning I had later. Um, when I when I was 9 years old, I was really into making money, and and so I put together this big like fair in my backyard, and I was charging the kids. Obviously, this is early 70s, so yeah, I was charging nickels and pennies for different activities that they could do at my fair. And I believe this child was about 4. She'd come with her older sister, and she walked up to one of the activities and she didn't have any money on her, so I turned her away. And my mom came out, and my mom walked up to me and she said, "I want you to stop charging money." And I said, "But mom, the whole point is to make the money." So I got in this argument with her. And what she said to me was, she said, "It's hurting me to watch you charge money because I'm not seeing all the kids get to play the games." And I think if I were to try to like pinpoint something, that had a big impression on me. And I think it did start something about this path of empathy for me, of that was pretty major. And so I handed her my bag of cash, and she walked in back in the house, and so then I ran, and it's funny, my fun didn't change. The stress left. Like, I can recall, like, then there wasn't the stress about worrying about counting the money or having to exchange the money, but I was having just as much fun without any stress. I was having fun playing the games with the kids. And later, something the Dalai Lama spoke about in the Heart Sutra trainings was, he was talking about, um, part of leaning into our compassion is looking at how a mother teaches a child. And I remember remembering that moment again. And so there was something there that I think I experienced that went, "Oh, I'd like everyone to have as much fun equally." And maybe that also started my whole path of being curious.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story. I could really feel that, your mother kind of feeling that. Well, we've gone for about
Oh
almost
yeah.
an hour here, so I could kind of talk for hours. But is there anything that you feel you'd like to say, that hasn't been said, at least, for this discussion?
Yeah, nothing comes so much. I really enjoyed talking with you. The time flew. This was the first time I looked up at the clock as soon as you said that. So I was really enjoying the connection and the discovery and kind of exploring things. So I'd be happy to do it some more.
Oh, good. Yay. Well, I would like to do that as well. I'm doing kind of these ongoing dialogues as well as some panel discussions, get a couple other people
Yeah.
together to see kind of how that influences the dialogue and the kind of the mutual curious exploration, together. So, yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm so glad that we've been talking for quite a long time via email, connecting off and on. So I'm glad we got a chance
Yeah.
to really get together and chat and really get to know you a little bit better.
Yay. Me too. Me too. I'm really grateful.
Okay,
And
well, oh, sorry.
and my guess is that it'd probably be good to schedule Jesse at a different time so that you can kind of get him in a nice good chunk
Yeah,
like this.
yeah, that was my sense as well. So
Yeah.
um, I look forward to that too.
Yeah.
Chatting with him. He's going to be there at your beautiful location
Yeah.
there too.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, great. Well, yeah. So yeah. I don't know what else to say. Keep the conversation going, and we can keep working to build this new society, or not new, but kind of promote, see what we can do
Yeah.
to raise the value of empathy within society. Is
Yeah.
you know
Well, it'd be fun too to get you some interviews with some of the youth that have come to our intensives or get a panel of youth together. It would be kind of fun.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, can do it
Yeah.
right there from your porch. You're showing me you have your porch right there where you do the workshops. And it was also
Yeah.
your website. I was going to show that. I had it queued up here. Is that the Zen NC? Is that
Yeah,
your main
ZenVC, kind
Zen
of a
VC?
play on Zen and NVC .org, and then also playinthewild.org.
Eh,
Playinthewild.org is all our youth and family work and
Okay.
educators. Yeah.
And I also saw you had a book out, Peaceable Revolution through Education.
Yep. Yep.
So those are just some kind of further resources, and your website as well. That I imagine, not your website, but your Facebook page is
Yeah.
another resource that anyone can kind of get in contact with you. And
Yep.
yeah,
Those are probably the best ways.
okay. Oh, and there's also what happened to World Empathy. Was it the
Worldempathy.org. It's
uh-huh.
still up as a resource for needs in 17 different languages. We're actually going to add Finnish. I'm very excited in about a couple weeks. And so we're still adding languages. And so right now it still supports and hosts the International Day for Empathic Action on October 2nd, which I was part of the team that founded that a few years ago. And then some people have taken it over to be able to run the through the day tele-empathy line. But Jesse and I are working to get worldempathy.org as a nice resource page or as a link, particularly because we've been able to accumulate so many translations of needs.
Well, okay, then. Well, I guess we'll bring this discussion to an end and look forward to our next connection.
Great. Yay. Thanks,
So,
Edwin.
thank you, Catherine.
All
Real
right. Take
pleasure.
care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
See the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.